So welcome everybody to our first official MESA Company Convos session. We're so excited to have you all here attending. We really started this as a way to connect all of our students directly with our industry representatives in a small group setting for you to answer questions, get as much information out of our representatives as possible so that you are prepared for your future. Keep a lookout for our monthly series. Invitations will be coming out for the next one in February. It will be with Oracle. And we're going to be using the chat function and the Q&A function for this session. So in order to get started with that, we thought it would be fun to have all of you add in your campus. So if you wouldn't mind using the chat function, make sure it works and go ahead and let us know where you are all from. During the session, you can use the Q&A or the chat function to ask questions. And you can do that by at the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a Q&A function, and just go ahead and type your questions in there, and that way we can monitor them as they come in. Don't be afraid to ask questions. You can ask them anonymously if you like, or you can ask them with your name. Either one is fine. And we also want you guys to share this on social media and give Alice and JSat Automation and MESA a shout out on social media. You can use the hashtag MESA Company Combos, which we'll put in the chat. And we will also share a link at the end of the session to give your feedback, so you can answer a bunch of questions for us and let us know how you liked the series and if you'll be joining us for future ones. So we'll share that in the chat as well at the end of the session. And now I want to thank our very first MESA Company Combos presenter, Alice Rystov, for jumping in and really kicking the series off. She also volunteered at the Student Leadership Conference as an interviewer, and she was really eager to engage with all of our MESA students, so we're super excited to have her here. She's a senior automation engineer at JSat Automation and has previously worked in biomarine, pharmaceutical, and automation engineering systems. She attended Irvine Valley College and earned a bachelor's in chemical engineering from UC Davis. And I want to make sure you guys all ask her about her undergraduate research at UC Davis. I think that'll be really interesting to hear from her perspective on that. She's also active in the International Society for Pharmaceutical Engineering and San Francisco's professional chapter, where she serves as the Young Professionals Chair, which is really great to know that she's also active in the community. So please welcome Alice.
Well, thank you so much. That was a really solid intro. So as maybe already said very, very well, probably better than I could have, I've got a pretty long background in kind of doing outreach activities. All of them pretty much came from the fact that when I transferred to UC Davis from Irvine Valley College, I didn't understand how everybody knew all these things that I just didn't know. And so when I graduated, I really kind of made it my mission to try to make things as easy for people as possible, so they wouldn't struggle as much as I did, as fun as that was at the time. So when I graduated college, I studied chemical engineering, and I think I was always kind of more interested in electrical engineering and towards the end of my college career, programming. So automation was kind of a pretty natural choice for me. So far, I've been in automation for about 6 years. The company that I work for right now is called JSat Automation, and we kind of focus in automation projects in the life sciences. So let me ask you guys, when you think about automation, what do you think about? You can respond in the chat or just in person. I'm not that scary. Tell us more about your undergrad research at Davis. Sure. So I actually attended Davis for the purpose of doing research. When I was at Irvine Valley College, I worked as a lab tech. And so I really kind of liked it, just doing stuff that was more physical, I could do something with my hands so I could understand what it was I was learning in class. And when I was looking at applying at colleges, the way that I actually picked where I was going to go, I'd gotten into a couple of them. And I emailed pretty much any professor I was interested in researching under. So for those of you who are kind of in junior college right now, I don't know if you know this, but at the UC level, you can do research and you can actually get it counted towards graduating college credits. And I was really interested in doing it because, again, to me, that was the best way that I was learning. So when I was choosing between my schools, it was Davis and UCLA and a couple other ones. I emailed a bunch of the professors and I was hey, is there any way you would let me work in your lab? The only people who responded to me were professors from Davis. And I was oh, Okay, well, that makes things easy. Cool. So I worked in a mechanical engineering lab when I first got to Davis. I actually worked on creating like a sensor of like for a very specific use. It was basically to detect these it's like non-volatile compounds, and it was to address an issue. There was basically it was like a bacteria, and it was actually just like taking out just these droves and droves of orange trees that were everywhere. And when I say orange trees, I mean trees that grow oranges. So basically, it was like decimating like the production, like the supply chain to like having delicious oranges in the morning and orange juice. After that, I worked in more of a chemical engineering lab. God, I don't even remember what I did there. For that one, it was more like cell tissue analysis. The reason that I actually jumped labs was because the grad student that I was working under at the first lab had ended up graduating, and the one that I ended up working for after I didn't like as much. But the one in the second lab, the chemical engineering lab, he was so awesome. Like he was such a great mentor to me, and I'm so glad I made that jump. Um, okay, now can you guys answer my question about like when I say automation, what do you think? Yeah, that's totally right. So Luke, you got it right. So what automation is, at kind of the scale that I'm talking about, is in any manufacturing process, at least the way things are largely done now, very rarely is it kind of like done by humans with their hands. The main types of equipment that I work with are things like bioreactors. There's a lot of like filtration equipment that I work with. I don't know how much you guys know about chromatography, but there's like tangential flow chromatography. There's, oh, what is the other one? I always forget it. There's a couple different types of chromatography. There's centrifuge. I can never say this word, but it's the process by which you centrifuge something and separate it. And the way that we like aggregate those things in life sciences or in biotech or whatever you want to call it is there's upstream and then there's downstream. So upstream is like we're going to grow all these cells to do like whatever it is we're doing with them. Downstream is like filtering those cells to do whatever it is you're doing with them. And after that, there's like packaging and everything else. So I worked with both like upstream and downstream, and I've also worked a lot with like utilities, because you would be genuinely surprised to know that you need utilities to actually run a manufacturing plant. What was the, what was the hardest part of going from an undergrad student to a real world engineer? This was a funny one. So my major had nothing to do with automation. So automation is largely electrical engineering, computer science, mechanical engineering. And when I graduated, I will remember this forever. I get into the field, I get into my first job, and they're like, we're having a problem with this VFD. Can you fix that? And I was like, yeah, sure. And like, I just turned around and was like, VFD. So what I'm basically saying is that it was hard to transition from not having this very like hands-on practical experience with things like VFD, which is a variable frequency drive, which is it's not really that complicated, but because I didn't know what it was incredibly complicated. So I think it was taking all these like theories that I had been taught and going through it and not really using them, I guess. Is that a good answer? Cool.
So there's some questions in the Q&A, Alice. One
Aha.
is, how much hands-on and hands-off are you on now that you are working?
Hands off in terms of like how much I do like programming, or what do you mean by like hands on? Like am I mostly
So,
managing people now?
so whoever submitted that question, if you can answer a clarifying question, that would be helpful. In the meantime, why don't we move on to the next question, which is, what is the toughest part about your job?
Yeah, it's a great question. The toughest part about my job is trying to find time to do anything. I'm still working on the cloning machine. I haven't really made much progress. Uh, so I think the toughest part is really finding time. I have a pretty good understanding of the right way that things should be done, the right way that things should be built, the right way that things should be programmed, and it's very hard to find the time to do things the right way, which I personally believe is pretty important. So I think that's the answer. Um, while we're kind of waiting on that first one, have you had experience working at a national lab or the lab at other universities? So the first lab I worked at Davis, we had a grant from DARPA. DARPA sounds right. I might be making that up, but it was some branch of the federal government that had given us a grant to like do this research. That's pretty much been my experience working within kind of like more of a national lab, but really all I've pretty much done is work in like the undergrad research and then the lab at my junior college. What is my normal daily work routine? I like to call it firefighting. I do a lot of firefighting. I don't know why. I think I just get the projects that are like dumpster fires, as I affectionately call them. um, but a typical day, I have my first morning meeting at 8 a.m. Then I have another meeting at 8:30 a.m. And then by the time I'm done with meetings, somehow it's 10 a.m. So my day can range from maybe I made a change on a piece of equipment and there's some tests that I have to run that like I have to just make sure that it actually worked correctly. The thing that I've been working on lately is there's a particular type of control system that I've never worked with before, and I was kind of curious as to how it worked. So what I did is actually built a like a virtual infrastructure of that of that control system. And I've been just kind of like running tests on it to kind of see how it interacts and kind of like I really wanted to do kind of like a system analysis on if I was going to design the system a little bit later, like what would be the things that I would need to consider in advance. So for example, like one of the parts of that particular control system platform is that it has a historian function. And this historian function, it does exactly what it sounds like. It just historizes data. But you can imagine that from sort of like a hardware perspective, that data in a SQL database takes up like a huge amount of storage, like just a shocking amount of storage. So when I was building out that virtual infrastructure for that virtual machine, I had to make sure that I allocated, I think it was something crazy. It was like 750 like gigabytes or something. It was nuts. So that's kind of like my day to day. It does vary a lot. It didn't vary this much when I was first starting out. When I was first starting out, I was pretty predictable. But now that I'm a couple years into my career, it's definitely fluctuates pretty heavily.
Great. So Amelia asked a question in the chat that says, what did you have to learn besides what you were taught at school for the interview or to get the job at JSat?
So JSat isn't my first job out of college. My first job out of college was working at an integration company that's kind of similar to JSat. I think kind of what you're asking is like what skills like did I kind of show the interviewer that I had to kind of get the job? Is that kind of what you're asking?
I think that's where she's going. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Amelia. So I'll tell you somebody who like interviews and hires people now. I would never expect somebody who's graduating from college to have 5 years of experience because that's stupid. And I think most hiring managers who are looking for people who are just out of college think pretty much the same. So what I personally have looked for, and I think what I had showed when I was first interviewing was I showed that I know how to like take responsibility of things. Like if you assign me something, like I'm gonna go figure it out. I'll ask questions when I need to, but I'll just go figure it out. And like you don't have to worry about it anymore. Two is that like I could figure things out if I like I could figure things out to like a pretty decent degree by myself. I think as a new graduate, one of the ways that you can kind of demonstrate that is by saying, hey, I've done this, this thing that's sort of like outside of my regular curriculum. Like I taught myself Python or I taught myself this. Like I think employers are, especially now, are kind of looking for that kind of thing where you can self-teach a lot better, especially in this kind of virtual environment when it's much harder to like mentor. I honestly think that was kind of it. I mean, like as someone who manages people now, like the thing I really want from my employees is like, can you just take this from me? I don't have to worry about it anymore. Okay, so there's 2 questions.
So,
Okay.
Somebody asked, how has the pandemic affected your job? I'd love for you to answer that. I'd also love for you to talk about how it's affected JSat in general, and not just you in particular, but also the company and how the pandemic has affected you and the future. If you know that.
Yeah, that's happy to answer that. So when the pandemic first hit, we at JSat were like, we tend to just be more conservative with how we handled things. So we basically just said like, just work from home, like just work from home. The nice thing about automation is you can do pretty much everything from home. The only times that I would really need to go to site is if, let's say I was like installing a new piece of equipment. I kind of need to kind of go on site, make sure the thing works the way that I think it's supposed to, make all the connections that I'm supposed to. But other than that, the majority of all automation can be done from home. It's not terribly different from software engineering. As far as like how we're planning to deal with it in the future, we do have some people back in the office kind of here and there. We're largely just letting people choose how they feel and go based on like how comfortable they are. I personally have been working from home like pretty much this entire time, with the exception of the couple commissioning things that I've had to do on site somewhere. Does that answer the question?
Yep. So someone in the chat mentioned, when you say professional experiences, would you consider your lab experiences or other work during college as professional experience? And, is that
Absolutely.
something you'd include on your resume?
Yeah,
Talk about that.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I totally did. And when I look at resumes now, like that's what I want to see. Like, again, like I don't expect that you guys as like new graduates have any real job experience. That doesn't seem very reasonable because you're new graduates. So I actually really like to see things that you've done, right? Like maybe you were a server at a restaurant, maybe, you were babysitting. Like there's a way to put things on your resume that kind of show all those different characteristics that I was talking about.
Speaking to that, if you can talk about when you're analyzing a resume currently for jobs, whether it's for an internship or the general careers that take place at JSat, can you speak to different types of careers that are actually available at JSat, or different types of internships that maybe students should push their resumes towards?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at JSat, I would say if you kind of looked at like all of our LinkedIn profiles, they all kind of say the same thing. They're like, automation engineer or like software engineer. That said, if you also look at everyone's background at JSat, there's chemical engineers, there's electrical engineers, there's mechanical engineers, there's computer science. Like we have a pretty good distribution of majors, and it's kind of the nice thing about engineering is that you can kind of just like take it and kind of apply it to pretty much anything. So I think if you're interested in controls, if you're interested in automation, if you're interested in the life sciences, I think JSAT would probably be a pretty good place to you. I mean, I'll tell you guys like what I've kind of realized after working for a couple of years now is like I care a lot about what I do, but I think I care more about like who it is that I work with. And JSAT has essentially sort of just like exceeded anything I ever expected for a job. So for example, like I really care about outreach. And my boss, anytime I need to like go do outreach and take off work, he's like, go take the day, I'll pay you. Go, just go. Because he knows it's important too. I don't know. I think that was like a very roundabout answer, but hopefully I covered it in the first
Oh,
part.
that was great. That was great. So somebody is asking if you use a particular aspect of distributed control systems or manufacturing methods such as lean or agile, and how are your projects team structured?
So lean manufacturing and like the agile methodology are typically done kind of like after the control system is put into place. What I would consider those methodologies is sort of tuning the system to be as efficient as possible. So that's not really something that I've personally done. I can't speak to it. Our project teams are typically structured in a way that we'll have a senior engineer like myself, and then someone who's mid-level, and then probably 2 or 3 like kind of junior engineers. But the nice thing is we have kind of like a pool of resources of like pretty good technical people that we can pull from at any time if we need help.
What would you say is the most important skill you need to be an engineer in the field, outside of just the technical stuff that you know?
I think understanding the bigger picture is important. I think one of the things that makes me a good engineer is that I don't just consider, okay, I just need to change code. Like I really try to think about like, how's it going to affect the system? as I've seen a couple times where people don't take that into account. And with controls, especially, if you change code, something physical will happen in the system. So let's say like I changed like the span on a valve. It could actually damage that valve. Or let's say I don't know, I like close a loop too early. I can actually overpressurize the system. So I think really trying to understand like what the thing that you're doing is going to affect has been really helpful.
Great.
Mhm.
And another question we got is, can you give an example how mechanical engineers play a role in automation? And then beyond that, is JSat currently hiring full-time and or interns?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still working on kind of getting our intern program together, but I think it's something we'll be able to do this summer. We are hiring full time for sure. As far as mechanical engineers, like I said, I don't see a huge difference between what the mechanical engineers do versus what the electrical engineers do versus what the chemical engineers do. Like we all do automation, if that makes sense. And we don't really put people on projects based on their degree. I think from what I've seen is like if you have an engineering degree, like I kind of assume that you can figure it out. I mean, I'll help you figure it out, but I kind of assume that like you're a pretty intelligent person and you'll figure it out.
If somebody was interested in applying as an intern or a full-time career, how would they go about doing that at JSAT?
I think we have a couple job postings that are up. I forget what platforms our HR is really using, but if you just Google JSAT, you're probably going to find at least like the full-time ones. As far as the internships, I mean, at this point, it's kind of just like reach out to me, and you guys are welcome to do that on LinkedIn or my email address or wherever else. And I'll do the best that I can to sort of put you in touch with the right person.
And someone is asking, are there immediate openings or is summer the closest for internships?
Yeah. So for immediate opportunities for full-time position, I think we have 2 or 3 like full-time positions that are open, other for like automation validation engineers. Um, in terms of internships, summer would be the closest.
Great. And we did get some clarifying information on that other question. So the how much hands-on and hands-off, he or she is asking how much of your job is behind a desk versus not behind a desk?
It's a good question. So the pandemic's factored into this a lot, right? I think before the pandemic, a lot of my job was out in the field. I'd say probably 70% of it was out in the field. And by out in the field, I mean, I'd be like out in the manufacturing floor. Like with the pandemic, most of the work that I'm doing behind a desk at home. But like I said, when it's time for implementation, like 100% of that time is out in the field. Probably evens out. I haven't done the math, but I think it probably evens out.
Um, Somebody is requesting information on the company culture. What's it really like to work there? And also at some of the other places you've been, if you can do a comparison of different company cultures, I think that would be great.
Yeah, so it's hard to do comparison because I think where you're at a company and like how you feel about that company is largely based on like where you're at in your career at that time. So if I was in this job like as like a senior automation engineer when I just graduated, I would probably hate it because I would have no idea what I was doing. Um, I think at JSAT, the company culture is pretty great. It's a smallish company. It's like I think it's under 50 people. But what really makes it a good place is that the like my boss, whose name is G2, he's like this very rare type of senior engineer where he like a lot of senior engineers I found, they'll just like tell you how to do something because they're like, I know the only right way. And you're like, that's not the only way. But G2 in contrast doesn't do that. And he lets you figure it out. And he just supports you while you do it, which is pretty amazing. BioMarine was pretty great as well. My role there was a bit different. I was in frontline automation, which means I was on call all the time. And so the dynamics of a group like that are pretty different because it's very fast. You have to just figure things out and move on. So all in all, I've been very happy in terms of company culture with the places that I've worked. At the same time, company culture is very, 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 very high on my list of priorities at a company. Like I will look at company culture and like kind of company mission as like one of my top priorities when I'm choosing my job.
Great. Um, on that topic, is there anything that you would tell your former self or your undergraduate self, looking back, that you've learned
Yes.
over the last couple of
Take
years?
circuits.
Take circuit. Okay.
Take circuits, please. You should figure out power distribution on your own at some point, which was not fun.
Great. What software do you commonly use in designing the control systems?
So there's a pretty wide array of software platforms when it comes to these control systems, although there's probably about 5 that are regularly used in industry. I would say the most commonly used is Delta V. I would say second most commonly used is Rockwell and the Factory Talk suite. I would say third is Wonderware, which was bought up by Aviva pretty recently. There's also Siemens, which is used more commonly in Europe. And then most recently, the one that I've seen is a company called Inductive Automation, and they have a software called Ignition.
Cool. In the chat, we have another question. It says, are there any regular positions for almost graduates, or are all the positions, do they all require a degree?
I think for a full-time position, there's just too much work that comes with a full-time position to be able to do it like kind of like while you're handling a class load. I think if we get to the point where I can figure out how to do a co-op, that would be available, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. That said, right, like just find me on LinkedIn or ping me and we can like work together like while you're finishing out your degree to like make sure that you're like ready for the opportunity like when you're graduating, right?
Can you share a little bit about the diversity within JSat? Male, female, and other ethnicities. We'd love to hear our MESA students, come from a variety of backgrounds, and we'd love to
Yeah.
hear how JSat is approaching that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we don't have any like diversity initiatives. But again, like if you just look at our LinkedIn, we have a pretty diverse group of people. At the senior level, there's myself and I think 2 other women, but that's not for lack of trying. I have seen a huge drop off in the number of women that are simply just like applying for senior positions. I think the way that we approach diversity as JSAT is that it's always something that we keep in mind, especially when it comes to things like unconscious bias, especially when we interview, when we do the selection process. One of the things that I put in place when I came on board is that we should have basically like 3 different people, which is kind of excessive, like interview whoever it is we're interviewing, and they should all kind of come from different backgrounds, because if you have people interviewing this person who are all from the same background, they'll probably all tell you the same thing. I think that's worked out pretty well.
If someone is currently working on their resume, is there name a couple things that they should definitely include, number one, and also how important is an online presence, whether it's LinkedIn, Jumpstart, others, etc. How much is that really reviewed, for someone who's hiring?
Got it. Online presence at this stage of not just JSAT, but for every company is super, 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 super important. Super important. I think people look at that way more than they look at a resume. That's one of the things I always do is when I get an application, I just go look at that person's LinkedIn, because to me, like a resume, like it has to be a certain format of a certain length. And I kind of want to see like what else this person's done. I think LinkedIn and these other platforms are a great way of showing that. As far as like what I think should go on a resume, obviously cover the fundamentals, like, year of graduation, degree of graduation. Did you have any publications while you were in school? One of the things that I've liked seeing on people's resume is just a statement about like, are you willing to relocate? Like yes or no, just say like objective, like yes, I'm willing to relocate. I'm interested in position in life sciences, because that saves like me time. In terms of skills, if you are really good at something, please put it on there. Like yes, there's certain things that may not be relevant, but like the part of what will make you successful in an interview is probably like 30% technical and like 70% if the people that are interviewing you think that you're going to get along with your coworkers or that you're going to scare them.
Speaking of that, is there anything that they shouldn't put on their LinkedIn profile or resume? Is there things that they should be leaving off? For example, is MESA, stating that you were in MESA, we share that with our students as a very positive thing.
It
And
is a
we
super
encourage,
positive thing.
yeah, we encourage them to put that on. Is there things like that or other things that they should not be highlighting?
I'll give you an example of a funny one, and this wasn't like offensive or anything. It was just funny. Like there was a person whose whose resume I reviewed. It was a couple of years ago. He had all the different browsers listed under skill sets. So like Safari and Internet Explorer and like Google Chrome and Firefox. So like probably things like that that just aren't relevant, and the hiring manager would be like, "Huh, that's weird." But I think including things like MESA is a great thing. Like especially if you're kind of when you're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you, right? And like a company like ours, or like me, for instance, like I would see MESA and be like, "That's awesome!" Like I'm super excited to have someone who like cares and understands that that's that's like worth their time to participate in, because it absolutely is. And a company that would look at that and be like, ugh, like that's probably not a company you might want to work for.
Great,
Right?
that's super helpful.
Maybe,
No, that
maybe.
was perfect. Thank you so much, Alice. It looks like we've gotten to everybody's questions. What I would like to do is have you put, Alice, if you can, put your email in the chat function. That would be awesome. If everyone can go ahead and thank Alice via chat for participating today. We so appreciate having her here, and thank you for providing your email address so folks can send you additional questions they might have. And this is being recorded and will be available on Jumpstart for folks if they want to re-listen to it or have any additional questions. And just remember, to all the attendees, we are putting in a survey. So please go ahead and click that link to make sure to give us feedback. And we hope you guys can join us for our next session in February. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. The questions were great, and I really enjoyed doing this.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.